Thank you so much for watching. I'm super excited to present for this year's History Detectives, one of the little extra programs. I am presenting on my new book, my first book, Hidden History of Grand Rapids. So first I will give a little overview of the book, a little bit about the process of writing the book, and then I will do a deep dive into the first chapter, kind of go through the chapter narrative, and then I'll do a brief overview of the other chapters and the other interesting historical topics. So the book is published by Arcadia Publishing. They reached out last spring and asked if I would be interested in writing a book about Grand Rapids history. They were really great to work with, helping narrow down the topics through the editing process and through the marketing process, and just overall really great to work with. As the title, Hidden History of Grand Rapids, suggests, the history within the book is different from the conventional history often encountered by the general populace of Grand Rapids. I purposefully shied away from anything to do with furniture and tried to stay away from the topics of other great local history researchers. I dedicated the book to my wife and my 4 huskies. They're a pretty wild bunch, but they're definitely my most avid fans. The photo here appears on the back of the book. It shows the city engineering department workers uncovering a section of street for some sewer repairs. I picked the image to somewhat represent digging up hidden tales of history, and it also ties into the book's section discussing different types of building materials. However, I don't know which street is in the photograph, so if you recognize it, please let me know. The book's first chapter is titled Wood, Stone, and Iron. We'll get into why I chose that title a little bit later, but the topic of the first chapter is surveys and surveyors. The 2 men here are well known in the local history community. Lucius Lyon and John Almy were 2 early surveyors of the greater Grand Rapids area. Lucius Lyon came to the Grand River Valley in 1831, but the history of Grand Rapids surveying actually starts a lot earlier, in 1785. President Thomas Jefferson, at the time, once a surveyor himself, signed the land ordinance in 1785. And this law laid out a system of surveying that shaped the history of Grand Rapids quite a bit. It was also a means for the U.S. To raise money for the young government, which did not yet have the authority to levy taxes. So this was a way to raise money for things. The plan was to measure township after township, beginning in Ohio. Each township was 6 squared miles, divided into 36 sections. The sections and surveys are reflected in the legal description of every property in Grand Rapids to this day. The surveying system itself came to the Grand Rapids area in 1831 with John Mullett as the first surveyor. Lucius Lyon was not far behind, and he surveyed the Grand River's west side. Lucius Lyon did. The surveys allowed for the land to be sold then to prospective settlers and land investors. This map here is a 1884 reproduction of Lucius Lyon's 1831 map. And then this one is another reproduction of a map that Lucius Lyon drew around 1831. In the book, I do touch lightly on Lucius Lyon's antagonistic relationship with Louis Campeau, but that has been explored quite a bit elsewhere and may have been a bit overblown. But I do discuss it mainly to explain how the overall map of their 2 plats became the village of Grand Rapids, drawn in 1838 by another surveyor, John Almy. Lucius Lyon became well known throughout the state, serving in the U.S. legislature before Michigan was a state, and serving as both a representative and senator after Michigan became a state. His influence can be found throughout Michigan. John Almey's contributions can also be found throughout the state, but his fingerprints are primarily centered mainly in Grand Rapids. Almey served as a state representative and a village trustee. He was a judge, president of the first bank in the city, and worked as an early city surveyor. He surveyed maps of Grand Rapids for early land investors and traveled all over the state. He kept himself pretty busy. Also included here on the image is an early theodolite used by the city surveyors and early city engineering department. It was Wright Lewis Coffin Berry who was the first city surveyor. That name might be familiar to some of you, but he has yet to have quite the attention that Lucius Lyon or John Almey have had. He is the main focus of the first chapter. Born in Ohio, Coffin Berry eventually married and moved to Michigan. They settled in Grand Rapids after a while, and Coffin Berry opened a jewelry repair store, kind of like an all-purpose engineering repair store. When Grand Rapids was incorporated as a city in 1850, Coffin Berry was appointed surveyor. I was able to focus on Wright Lewis Coffin Berry's story because of the records he left. His surveys and city work, to a degree, are preserved in the city commission proceedings, the maps, the plats, and his personal papers are preserved at the Bentley Historical Library at the University of Michigan. Specifically, he kept a diary from 1855 to 1858 and wrote daily about pretty much everything he did. Here is an example entry of his. Throughout his life, Coffin Berry absolutely loved map making and his surveying work. However, the city did not pay very much, and he still had to operate his jewelry repair shop to make ends meet. His first year of surveying for the city only netted him about $50. In his diary, he often complained about the trinkets and baubles he had to fix for residents and his neighbors, often listing them by name. He was immensely proud of his surveying work, though. This map here is one he drew near the end of his life in 1884. It shows the placement of Native American burial mounds that once adorned the west side of the Grand River. Coffin Berry's influence flows throughout Grand Rapids history, while surveyors like John Almey created plat maps and designed the abstract layouts of streets. It was Coffin Berry that actually did the bulk of the early street work. The process of making the road usable is called grading, and from 1838 to 1850, city records show that only 11 roads were graded. Coffin Berry did the bulk of street grading, surveying, measuring the angles of roads, the widths, measuring lots for residents, and doing any other surveying work and engineering work that the city and its residents needed, starting in 1850. Here is a diagram that the early surveyors made, I believe Coffin Berry made, of the street elevations. The records he left behind, as with many records from the Grand Rapids Engineering Department, are absolutely works of art. This is a plat map that shows the East Side Canal and the owners of the different lots using the canal for water power. We can see familiar names like Butterworth and Comstock and Berkey. And the little design at the top there, that, I believe, is the meridian line and is often kind of unique to each surveyor, each imparting their own little flourishes. One instance of piecing together the story of surveys is found by looking at Sheldon Avenue. Coffin Berry was called to Sheldon Avenue because residents and lot owners in May of 1855 discovered that the road was incorrectly measured. The way lots had been platted out had Sheldon Avenue angling eastward, causing the southernmost lots to measure 20 feet longer than they were supposed to. From Elm Street, which was renamed Goodrich in 1873, to Wealthy, Homes had already been built, though none survived from that time. The lot owners petitioned the Common Council, our city commission, to fix the error by making the road narrower. Instead, the city agreed that the lots would need to adhere to the original plat map, what the map's intent was. So the lots to the southernmost lots were shortened by 20 feet. Coffin Berry went to work on Sheldon Avenue to properly survey the street and notify homeowners and such, and brought with him William Cook, who was an alderman at the time, and also a prominent blacksmith and firefighter. Coffin Berry brought the alderman to help because he knew that the lot owners would not be happy. Coffin Berry's records and diary are filled with little stories like these, as the first city surveyor laid out the early roads. It's likely that we have Coffin Berry to thank for much of the early layout, the actual layout of the city. Possibly more so than Lucius Lyon or John Almy. One project that Coffin Berry was especially proud of was his plan to place survey monuments all throughout the city. These were used to denote where subsections were. He created a map noting where the monuments were. They were made of wood, stone, and iron, hence the chapter title. He recounted in his diary one such stake that he placed, made of iron. It was 2.5 feet long, and he sank that into the corner of Division and Fulton, replacing a wooden stake that he had actually a couple of years beforehand, nearly a decade beforehand, watched Lucius Campout place. In 1865, Coffin Berry, still acting as city surveyor, placed another monument at that same intersection, this time on the opposite corner in Monument Park. The monument was a boulder with a big iron stake in it, and this was going to be the benchmark that all streets would be measured against. The benchmark stayed in Monument Park and actually until 1913, so quite a while. But it was eventually removed in 1913 for a new-fangled weather kiosk, but that was only removed 8 years later in 1921. The engineering department originated out of the surveying operation that Coffin Berry had set up. In the 1870s, the Common Council had voted to widen Monroe Center. The business interests along Monroe Center really did not want this plan. They didn't want to go along with it. They petitioned the Common Council to vote against widening, but the Common Council used some sort of eminent domain and widened Monroe Center. And so the business folks along the street, along Monroe Center, petitioned the state to pass a bill allowing a Board of Public Works to operate within Grand Rapids and control street renovations and sewers and such. The Common Council voted down sending the bill to the Michigan legislature. They didn't want some of their power to be diluted, but the legislature passed it anyway, splitting up the power between the two. The city's surveyor's position held on during the Board of Public Works time, but it was more of a division of the Board of Public Works. And it was held off and on by Coffin Berry. He was almost continuously coaxed to take up the position over the years when other surveyors were not up to the task. So while he was still a surveyor and while he was still doing the bulk of the work, his influence diminished a bit. This continued until actually the 1880s, when the engineering department was fully formed and the city surveyor's position was changed to city engineer. So kind of regained, the city surveyors kind of regained some of that clout. The records of the engineering department are some of the most elaborate views in the city's history, not only for the information that they provide, but by their artistic design. Just beautiful plans. This is a section of the plans in 1893 for Wealthy Avenue Bridge. These are the 1879 plans for the Leonard Street Bridge. The details are just meticulously drawn. Here is another section of the Leonard Street Bridge plans. And here is another section noting that the plans were presented to the Board of Public Works. The annual report of the Board of Public Works shows that the terminology of city engineer and city surveyor were sometimes interchangeable for a while before the engineering department was fully established. The reports show the wide extent of the work that the department and the Board of Public Works do or did. And here is the engineering department a little bit later with their drafting tables, where they would design parks and streets and sewers, manhole covers and street lights, just very artistic placemaking. Here is an image of street construction organization display that was located at the engineering department in the late 1920s. And here is the staff of the engineering department from the 1930s. I end the book with Coffin Berry as well in the epilogue. He was just such a fascinating character that dedicated the majority of his life to the city. After being city surveyor for over 25 years, he became the director of the city poor department, which was responsible for welfare-related activities. He worked for the city up until the day he died. On his final day, he boarded the Granville Line streetcar at 6:30 in the morning and headed to work. He intended to wrap up his position. His family had just convinced him that it was time to retire, and so he was heading to the office to wrap up his work. And just as the streetcar pulled up to his stop, he died. There are no great statues of Coffin Berry in the city. There's no Coffin Berry streets or avenues. But his indelible mark on Grand Rapids, the city, can be seen and felt on every street if you know where to look. So that is an abbreviated overview of the first chapter of the book. I have here the chapter titles of the rest of the book. Hopefully they might pique your interest. The topics, to varying degrees, I'll touch on aspects of the city that are hidden in plain sight. Hidden history of Grand Rapids. Thank you very much.